Finovate showcases cutting-edge banking and financial technology through a global conference series featuring short-form demos and thought leadership. Now, the conversation continues on the Finovate podcast.
Welcome, everybody, to the Finovate podcast. Joining me today, we have Jonathan Bell, partner at Red Compass Labs. Jonathan, thank you so much for being with me today.
Hi, Greg. Thanks. Honored to be with you. Thank you for the invitation.
Excellent. So let's start by just giving people an idea of the work that you're doing at Red Compass Labs, some really important pieces here. And I'll let you start off and just kind of introduce yourself and what we're going to be talking about today.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. So as a partner with Red Compass Labs, I guess I'm working with an exceptional team of people who've got 10, 15 plus years of experience in banking, working with the banks to effect transformational change in and around their payments and financial crime processing systems and processing methodologies, really. Added to that, I guess, in recent years, we've added expertise from, secure government intelligence of how to use big data technologies to find needles in haystacks. For various purposes I won't go into here, but a real understanding of the technology. And what we're doing actually in Red Compass Labs today is bringing that experience of banking together with experience of how to use the data techniques and technologies available to find evidences of what is actually a huge stain on our global society today, which is the modern slavery, human trafficking problem that we all face. And we're keen to talk about it and keen to share what we know, what we can do with the banks and others to help try and do what we can to eradicate this problem. And I think one thing that we've been doing of late, particularly with the European Women in Payments Network, EWPN, is to really try to raise awareness across that network of people in the banks and financial institutions to know what's happening in this space and then what can be done about it. So excited to talk to you about it today, Greg.
Yeah, certainly something which I think needs to be discussed a lot more. And obviously, we're going to unpack this a little bit more, but there are a lot of ways that banks are kind of in a unique position to have access to the data that can really help solve this problem and help bring some of the perpetrators of human trafficking and slavery to justice. So let's start by kind of talking about this from the bank standpoint and really helping banks understand the role they have to play in fighting against these problems. Can you start by just kind of giving us an overview of, where the banks kind of have access to this data and what they can really do to help shed some light on this?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, firstly, it's important to say that we believe very strongly that a strong society needs a strong banking industry. That if we have banking services running well, running properly for the people, then that's a way to make a strong society. And it's very important. It's like a cornerstone. It's foundational to a strong society today. So we're really keen to make that clear. So this is not about bashing the banks, but the banks are in a unique position, actually, that, of course, we buy and sell things. That's how economies work. That's how modern life works. And the banks are the ones that are processing those transactions. And, it's moved from being predominantly cash-based, I guess, a few years ago, to increasingly online transactions and faster and faster transactions, moving from things that takes multiple days to instant payments. And as each of those transactions happens, as each of those payments moves, it moves through the bank. And the bank, therefore, has a tremendous opportunity and actually has real ability to gain insights into what those payments are and what the purpose of those payments are. So the scale of the money that moves is huge. And sadly, wherever the payments move, as we know, people being people, and we've seen this throughout all of human history, where the payments move, where the money moves, their crime follows. And so the banks are in actually a unique position to be able to see into that data and as these payments move, to be able to understand what's going on and then to deal with that and start to address some of that problem.
I think that's really important, and coming back to your initial point, a strong banking ecosystem is really vital for any economy. I think that's absolutely true. And at the same time, I look at this less as something which is, necessary from a compliance standpoint, from a regulatory standpoint, although certainly there are regulatory pieces which touch this area, but this is a moral issue here. This is something which, you look at some of the great injustices that are being perpetrated in our world right now are centered around these two pieces, human trafficking and slavery. And I think anybody who has the opportunity to find out about it, to do something about it, really does have a moral obligation to step in and try and fight against this, because we are in a unique position right now. There's so much more data, so much more of this is online and viewable online. There's records of a lot of these payments in a way that there weren't before, that we can really start to engage with. And I think that's a really crucial piece. So I think, it's important to stress this is not a failure on the part of the banking ecosystem to this point, but it is something which I think is a moral imperative. So, obviously the pandemic and the kind of the last year have really changed a lot about people's financial habits. A lot more has moved online. How has this past year impacted financial crime more broadly, and then human trafficking and slavery more specifically?
Well, I think COVID has changed everybody's lives, and it's certainly changed in this space. And if we think about financial crime being something that exists and has existed for a while, and we know that the banks have really responded to this, and some very large amounts of money been paid in fines for failing to address this problem quickly enough. So I guess the bigger banks have thrown money at it and have come a long way in that, so they're much more mature. But when we say financial crime, of course, that's a large ranging thing from fraud to elder abuse, etc. But what we're really focusing on more today is the modern slavery human trafficking point, as you've touched on there, Greg. And that's a slice, I guess, within the wider, broader financial crime space. But it's sadly neglected too often. And that's what we need to raise awareness on. So how has COVID changed that? Well, I guess many new habits have happened as we're talking today. Thousands of miles between us, and technology allows us to be together, and that's great. But as the world has moved on to Zoom meetings, there have been various different things happening. Zoom bombing is a term I've heard more recently, people crashing into the meetings. But what we are seeing, though, as more and more of our lives is moving online, as you referred to, the transactions are moving from cash being handed over down a dark alleyway somewhere, and much more to online payments. And as you say, there's visibility then that's possible of those transactions. And I think, sadly, though many things have stopped during the pandemic, not least being able to get a haircut down the barbers on the high street, crime doesn't stop, and crime finds new ways, and they move the behavior and they move their things online. I think we've seen that cases of money muling has gone up, where people are being sort of spoofed into sharing account details, and then they're being paid money, and fraudulent transactions are moving through innocent people's accounts, and that kind of thing is happening on the rise. But in terms of specifically, I guess, the modern slavery human trafficking angle, people are being bought and sold, and the scale of this problem is huge. I know there were some newsworthy articles and incidents over the past year looking at slavery historically and so on. And your average person might imagine that slavery has largely stopped nowadays. But sadly, here's a number for you. 40 million people across the world considered to be victims of human slavery today. And that's a huge, huge problem that's still very, very real. And within that, sadly, many, many children. And that is, for me, the most tragic part of it. And this is happening, and these transactions are being legitimized by working their way through the traditional banking environment. There's things happening on, the dark web. There's things happening in crypto lands. And it's all of these things that we need to work to bring back together to understand what's happening so we can address it. And I think COVID has changed the world, but perhaps it more than just changed, it's accelerated changes that were happening anyway. And as that's happened, we've seen these instances of crime only going up, sadly.
Yeah, well, and a couple of really interesting pieces to pull out of there. I love the kind of this image of the dark alley, right? This is what we think of when we think of illicit transactions. We think of a darkened alley somewhere, a cash transaction, a suitcase full of money or something from TV shows that we watch. But actually, the dark alley exists inside of a bank walls in many cases. And it's simply a matter, to some extent, of just turning on the lights. We know where that alley is. We can see the transactions that are coming through, and we now have the technology to be able to flag some of these. So let's kind of turn the conversation. We've got about 3 minutes left, and I want to talk about specifically, what people who are listening to this and thinking, I want to do something, I want to try and help out. Let's talk about what they can do, either from the bank standpoint or the fintech innovator standpoint. What options are out there for people who are hearing this and want to make a difference?
Well, I think that's exactly the call, right? So whether you're in banks or in fintechs, I think there are things that you can do. And the first thing you can do is to be more aware yourselves, and so to understand what it is that constitutes evidence of human trafficking in the data. So if you're working inside a bank, you have, we talked about at the outset of this conversation, perhaps a moral obligation on behalf of your fellow human beings to do what you can as you come closer to this subject, this topic. So I think raising awareness is about, how do you spot the signs? How do you know in the data what it is that constitutes human trafficking crime, whether that's with children or adults or otherwise? And I think, for example, our partners at EWPN are doing a lot of work to raise awareness in this space for the banks to help understand what it is that they need to identify and when they can spot the signs. And that's very much, obviously, in the banks, in the branches still. There are still people coming into the branches, but increasingly so, it's in the data. So if you are in a bank and you're working with the data, the transaction data, understanding these payment flows, you will see some of these signs in that data, and there's things that you can do to help raise that awareness and to act on it. I think so what we're doing in Red Compass Labs is we're trying to work with the banks to raise awareness of what we call red flag accelerators. What are those data items that highlight the fact that human trafficking is happening in your data? And if you were to go to the Red Compass Labs website, you'll be able to find some details on that, and we'd love to talk more with you about it. Equally, you can go to the EWPN website and see what they're doing. And I think in May, there is a particular town hall webinar coming up that you've been more than welcome to join up and listen to learn a bit more about how to see what's happening and what to do about it. I think if you are in a bank, that's key. You can understand what's flowing through your systems. If you're in a fintech, maybe you're thinking, well, this doesn't relate to me. We're technology. But if you're fintech, you're financial services technology. So you're playing in some part, whether that's greater or smaller, with data inside financial services organizations. So it's all about money movements of one type or another. It's all about payments. So you are likely also processing or manipulating or analyzing the data that is going through that payment cycle. So you too should try to do what you can to understand and spot the signs as this human trafficking data flows through your environment. I think that's really important. And I would just call out, there's a party that we've been working with over the last couple of years here in the UK, Stop the Traffic. And they're across in the US as well, and they're working around the world. And they've been around a long time trying to raise awareness in this fight. Look them up. Look up Stop the Traffic too. So if I could point you in 3 places, look at EWPN, look at Stop the Traffic, and of course, do come to us at Red Compass Labs. We'd love to talk more about it. I think it's key that we share the knowledge that we have so that more people know what to look for and what to do. That's work from the UK government is doing. The independent anti-slavery commissioner, Dame Sarah Thornton, is doing great work on some of her partners like Themis. Then there's the Traffic Analysis Hub. All of these parties are working to raise awareness and get into the banking community to really help explain what we need to do, to look for it. So I think there's raising awareness is key. Collaboration is absolutely key. And then finally, data. As everything moves from the back alleys, the dark alleyways, into the lights to some extent within the banks, let's really work to shine a light on that data that we do have captured now. So every online transaction, it all leaves a trail. So it can be found and it can be put back together. But it can be expensive, it can be time consuming, it can be daunting. I think to come back to your earlier point, there is a moral obligation that we have to act on this. So that's why we're involved at Red Compass Labs. We want to act, we want to help the banks act, we want to help our partners effect change in this on behalf of our fellow human beings who, let's face it, are suffering, and they're suffering in their millions. So now is the time to act.
Yeah, certainly the scope of the problem, I think, is something that most people don't think about, don't want to think about, but it's something that's absolutely vital. We all need to be aware. And the first step, obviously, understanding what the problem looks like, and then taking that next step and trying to figure out how you can be a part of the solution. Jonathan, it's been an absolute pleasure chatting with you and getting some more information around this. I would encourage anybody who's listening to click on the links that we'll have in the episode description here for you so you can learn a little bit more about them. And really, just the more you understand about it, the more you talk to other people about it, the more light we can shine collectively as an industry on this, the better. So it's something that, again, Jonathan, really appreciate you taking the time and walking us through this. I think it's really important for everybody in the fintech and banking ecosystems to be thinking about this and to be aware. And hopefully we can make some really positive steps towards solving and really tackling this.
Thanks, Greg. It's a pleasure to be with you today. I appreciate your support in this fight. We're trying to love our neighbor, and this is one way that we can do it, by working together in this space. So I appreciate the time. Great to talk to you. Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. Absolutely.
The Finovate podcast is produced by Informa Connect in association with Provoke.fm Media. Check out Finovate.com for information on Finovate's upcoming shows and to learn how you can get involved. The discount code Finovate Podcast will save you 20% on tickets to all of our events. And you can email us at info@finovate.com for information on sponsoring, speaking, or demoing. Thanks for listening.